Hello, thank you for joining me on this tutorial video on how to perform data assignment and to retrieve takeoff and landing data in the AV-8B. So a quick forward, some of the contents of this video are made on adjustments that are applicable to DCS only and do not apply in the real world, and these are things such as considering for bugs in the code or changes in the flight model, just to make your methods more robust so that you can always achieve the information that you want and have a good time with whatever you're doing. So what we're going to go through today is terminology. So that's going to be really important to understand the rest of the information we're looking at today. Pre-flight, so that's essentially going ahead and getting all the information that you need about the aircraft and about the weather and where you're taking off or landing from. The pre-takeoff data assignment itself, and then how to use the takeoff data, and the pre-landing data assignment and how to use the landing data. And that's really the bulk of what we're going to be looking at today. And then at the very end, I'll look at how the AV-8B logic works and some considerations we need to make specific to DCS. Obviously, not everyone's going to be interested in that bit, but points 1 through to 6 are the really important bits today. However, if you do stay and watch point 7, you'll find it very useful for understanding the context behind why we use these methods. So, told, first of all, that's takeoff and landing data. PTDA, that's pre-takeoff data assignment. PLDA, pre-landing data assignment. So essentially the information that you need to put into the jet before either you take off and land. The VREST is the VSTOL computer/calculator on board the AV-8B. UFC is the upfront controller. The ODU is the option display unit. The MPCD is the multi-purpose color display. F plus W is the fuel plus water combined weight. BAW is basic aircraft weight, and this is defined as the empty weight of the aircraft, including the pilot. GWT is gross aircraft weight, so that's the all-up mass of the aircraft. And OWT is operating weight, and again this is defined as the empty weight of the aircraft plus anything that it needs to operate. So for a non-combat aircraft, that might be things like the hydraulic fluid, lubricants, that sort of thing. For military aircraft, it includes any adapters or rails required to carry the stores, but it does not include the stores itself or the fuel. F data, that's field data. WOD, that's wind over deck, also known as WOD. DLA, designated landing area. DHLA, designated helicopter landing area. And that's the end of our terminology. So, moving on to the pre-flight. There is a AV-8B flight planning calculator tool which I've created that is very useful for these purposes. Basically, go into the tool, input your weather information here as accurately as you can, input your field data here as accurately as you can, and this will become relevant later, just for double checking that you're within limitations. Put in your intended stores and put in your fuel. The computer will then calculate things such as your operating weight, the OWT, and the BDI. You'll need to make a note of both of these. Things such as the crosswind component, the headwind component, that's just to help you understand what the headwind and crosswind component is, which can be useful. And then obviously gross weight, you'll get that displayed in the jet anyway. This will go red if you're over the maximum gross weight. Your nominal landing weight, so how heavy it expects you to be when you come in and land, assuming that you've expended all of your stores and you're landing with the given percentage of fuel stated up here. Asymmetry takeoff and landing, again, it will look at these and it will tell you whether or not you are within limitations. If you are not, it will turn red. So asymmetry takeoff and asymmetry landing, essentially it'll say left or right and then it'll give you a value in inch-pounds. Now, for example, you might take off and say if you've got asymmetric stores, it might say that your right wing is heavy by however many pounds, and then on landing it might say that your left wing is heavy by however many pounds. It totally depends on what types of rails and adapters are there. The best thing to do is just to go ahead and play with the settings up here with what weapons you have, and it will figure out the rest for you. Important thing to remember is that, especially if you're landing on the boat, when you land, so when you return, you want your asymmetry to be left rather than right. This is in case you have an RCS failure or an engine failure, typically caused by being hit by ground fire. You want to roll away from the boat so you don't crash into the boat and perhaps kill someone else who's just about to take off and start their sortie. Down here it will give you your performance limitations. So sorry, this is the section where it will turn green, red or white. So you can select your type of takeoff and landing. It will tell you if you're within crossman limitations, asymmetry limitations and weight limitations by either turning red or remaining white. Okay, so to then go and use the pre-takeoff data assignment, hopefully by now you have a copy of your OWT and your BDI. First of all, we're going to go into the menu page in the MPCD, and then we're going to hit VREST. Then on the ODU, we're going to select BAW for basic aircraft weight, and we're then going to use the scratch pad on the UFC to overwrite the basic aircraft weight with the operating weight. We'll then go back over to here, and if we are doing a short takeoff, we'll hit stow, and then we'll go ahead and we'll complete all the elements in here. So normally you put the outside air temperature in first. Again, outside air temperature might actually be different on the system than it is outside. Let's say you're in a hangar and it says it's 20 degrees, but then when you taxi outside it's actually 31 degrees. So you want to make sure that's right from the start. Field elevation, if you're using QFE, set it to 0. Otherwise, if you're using the QNH, which you probably will do most of the time, either you're departing straight out and you don't need to worry about the QFE, or you're operating from FOBs and you always use QNH, you want to set the field elevation to relevant aerodrome height. Otherwise, hit the FDAT button here, and then you'll get options for runway distance, runway heading, and surface wind. Okay, if you're doing, say, vertical takeoff, instead of going to stow, you'd go to VTO, and then you would get your vertical takeoff information. So in this instance, we can see that we've got a dry takeoff value of 3,625 pounds of fuel plus water. So minus your 500 from that, that'll be 3,125. That's how much fuel you could carry in the current configuration and be able to perform a vertical takeoff. So that's the pre-takeoff data assignment. Things to remember: you need to have your OWT written down and your BDI written down. BDI is more important for cruise information. You'll actually use it to calculate things like your maximum range and endurance, and to calculate things like your bingo, and that's just done by going into the VREST computer and pressing either the cruise or the bingo pages. So pre-landing data assignment considerations: if the arrival DLA is different to the departure location, you need to update all of the field data. So maybe you've taken off from Senaki and you're landing at Tbilisi. You need to make sure that whenever there is an opportune time in the cruise, when you don't have much else going on, you just go in and you update all your field data. If you're performing maritime operations, immediately after takeoff, you need to change the wind data for accurate cruise and bingo information. So in the real world, a crew member would hold up a tote board that's got all of your values on. I'm not sure who calculates this. I believe it's someone in the flight ops room actually has a chart and looks at what you're carrying, wind over deck, etc., and figures out all the information for you, radios it to them, they write it on the board and hold it up for you. DCS, we don't have that, so you need to use the VREST. So when you're doing the F data for a short takeoff, you want to make sure that the wind matches the wind over deck, which may not always match the actual surface wind in the game. So after you take off, obviously if you want accurate cruise and bingo information, you don't want it reading that inaccurate wind over deck setting, so you need to change it to the actual wind value. But then before landing, again, the carrier is going to have a different wind value because it's steaming into wind, so you need to put it back to matching the wind over deck for accurate vertical landing performance information. If the arrival DLA is the same as the departure location and you are not operating from a ship, you do not need to change the F data, it should remain the same. You can obtain all landing data from the VREST, and you should do this before you land. So to do this, say we're actually in the cruise. I know this is on the ground, but let's say we're in the cruise. Our F data hasn't changed, but we've assumed we've already done that. We hit the VL button, and you can see you've got your wet and dry values. The important thing is to take your wet or dry value, whichever the case may be, and then minus £500 for it to account for the water, or whatever water is actually on board, which you can check on this panel over here. And then next we're going to come over to the bingo page, and we're going to set, using the bingo dial, the value of the water that we want. So in this instance we have, I believe it was £4,391, and as an example I've just put 4,900. It should actually be £3,891 that you would set it to account for the water. So you would set that with the bingo dial. And the reason we do this is we next turn on the fuel dump switches, and it will dump fuel down to the value set in the bingo panel. So if you set it at 3,000, it will dump fuel down to 3,000, 2,000 will dump fuel down to 2,000, you get the point. If you don't do this, and you then say try to land vertically at a FARP, you could fall out the sky and land on someone else, or if you try to land at the ship, you could just fall out the sky and land in the sea. So not things that you want to happen, especially when you're doing cyclic ops where you're landing and taking off a lot. Okay, so let's move on to the AV-8B told logic now. So in this example, we're going to look at how and why we give the aircraft the information it needs and what it can and can't see for the configuration that you see here, which is 2 sidewinders, 2 fuel tanks, 4 Mark 82s. Yes, this image was taken before the new stores limitation update, which would stop you from carrying a Mark 82 next to a fuel tank, and then a gun pod and a DECM pod. So what can the VREST quote-unquote see? Again, this is an assumption that the VREST can only see certain things. From experiences found where the VREST does not appear to see certain items, it is not always the case. The VREST does sometimes see them, and I'll come back to that soon. So the VREST can see the basic aircraft weight of the aircraft. Remember, the gross weight is not usable in the air because it requires weight on wheels. It can see the hung stores, excluding the pylons. So, for example, in that image, it could see the weight of the sidewinder and the weight of the bombs and the weight of the ammunition in the gun pod, but it could not see the weight of the rails that the sidewinders sit on, the LAU 7s, and it could not see the weight of the racks, the DITAS racks that the bombs sit on. It can see the weight of pods, including the DECM pod, the T pod, and the GAU-12 gun pod. So how does it work? The VREST determines the current aircraft weight, not including the fuel and water. It takes the weight from the BAW section of the ODU menu, so you can see now when we're overwriting the BAW with the OWT, we're including the things that it can't see to help it calculate accurate landing and takeoff information. The VREST then adds the weight of all the seeable stores, and then the VREST subtracts this value from the hover performance, and this is how it determines the max fuel plus water weight for vertical landing and vertical takeoff. So what additional considerations do we need to keep in mind? Occasionally the sim will change the VREST behaviour. In some updates the VREST can see the rails and racks, in others it cannot. For this reason, the provided calculator adds the weight of these items into the OWT to provide a more conservative estimate of the OWT to ensure the VREST provides workable fuel plus weight figures. So it's not always immediately obvious that the jet has been able to detect, say, the jitters, and apply that in its calculations. If you do not apply that in your calculations and it does not see it, it will say to you that perhaps you can carry an extra £300 of fuel. Doesn't sound like a lot, but if you're high and hot, and you're carrying a lot of stores and you're trying to do something like a vertical landing or a rolling vertical landing, it is the difference between being able to perform the landing safely or just crashing into the ground at the terminal phase of the landing. So it is important to make sure that your OWT is both correct and slightly conservative, and by that I mean the OWT is estimating that you are slightly heavier than you actually are. Sometimes the VRS page can be bugged, so when performing VLs and RVLs, always remember to do a 60 knot check. So again, this is something we'll go on about during all of the VSTOL course. When you're performing an RVL or a VL, when you get to 60 knots, you should be looking at the diamonds, the hexagons on the hood. You've got one for RPM and one for jet pipe temperature. If either of those have more than 3 legs, that is half of the hexagon, is complete at 60 knots, you need to go around, potentially dump fuel and or stores, and then come back in. Okay, so in the configuration shown above, with basic aircraft weight set only, not the operating weight, we can see that the aircraft can see the 2 M9s, the 2 external fuel tanks, and the 4 Mark 82s. The GAU-12, the DECM, and obviously the basic aircraft weight. The M9s, the external fuel tanks, and the Mark 82s have strikes through them to represent a scenario where you're actually coming back and you're landing and you've expended those stores, so you no longer have them attached to the jet. The jet will automatically say, oh, okay, I have 2 Mark 82s on board. That is an extra X pounds to my overall weight, and it will apply that when it then subtracts the lifting capacity of the aircraft to get you fuel plus water weight. So it knows its total weight on return is 17,520 pounds. It knows that its lift capacity is 19,314 pounds wet. It then takes the total return weight off from the lifting capacity, and it gives you your fuel plus water weight of 1,794 pounds. So the important thing to remember here is this does not include the hidden items such as the LAU-7s and the ditters. Okay, in this image, again, we're using the same configuration, but now we've got the operating weight put in, and the operating weight accounts for these quote-unquote hidden items such as the LAU-7s and the ditters. So we can see the 2 M9s, but obviously it assumes that they've been expended. Well, in fact, sorry, they will have been expended in order for the computer to say they're not there, because the computer can see the M9s and the bombs. It includes the 2 LAU-7s now, so this is red, signifying that it's included in the operating weight. It can see the 2 external fuel tanks. It can see the GAU-12, and it can see the ammunition in the GAU-12. It can see the DECM pod. And then it adds together all of the information that you've given it, which in its eyes is the OWT plus the stores, but I'll go through the breakdown of what the OWT is. The OWT is the basic aircraft weight plus the miscellaneous items. So the ditters and the rails and the gun pod all come to £1,470. So it adds all of this together, and now it sees its total weight as £8,990, so a little bit more than the £17,000 we had before. It minuses this value from the lifting capacity when wet, and it gives you a vertical landing fuel plus water weight of £740. So if we just go back one, we can see that that is a considerable difference. So £740 with the OWT, £1,794 without the OWT, and that can be the difference between landing or crashing. The good news about all of this is if the latest update of the game includes a VRES that can see the hidden items, that you include in the OWT, it will not penalise your performance. When you put in the OWT, it will actually just see what it needs to see, and it will act accordingly. The bad news is if the vrest is not in an update where it can see the OWT items, and you do not overwrite the BAW with the OWT, it may say that you can carry more fuel plus water than you are actually capable of. So what does this mean? It means if the flight model is set up to do so, you could get away with not putting the OWT in and it would show you the £740. It also means that if the flight model is set up in that manner and you do put the OWT in, it will show you £740 regardless, so there's no penalty for putting in the OWT. However, it also means that if the flight model can't see these hidden items and you don't put the OWT in, it will give you a value of £1,794, so a greater fuel plus water value. And the bad news about that is, again, if you put that in and the jet can't handle it, you will just crash. I hope you found this video useful. Again, to reiterate, the important things are use the calculator and make a note of the OWT and the BDI and put them into the jet on mission start, and then do the rest of your field data. If you have any questions about anything you've seen today or any suggestions, please contact me. Thank you very much.